The coffee in President Adams' cup had gone cold 3 hours ago, but she kept sipping it anyway. Her hands needed something to do while the worst news in human history played out on the screens around her. Outside the White House windows, Washington looked normal. People walked their dogs, children played in parks, and traffic moved in its usual patterns. None of them knew that humanity might have less than a week to live. The message had arrived at dawn through every communication channel humanity possessed. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't diplomatic. It was a simple ultimatum broadcast simultaneously to Earth, Luna, Mars, and every human settlement scattered across nearby star systems. The voice belonged to Admiral Thorne of something called the Galactic Dominion, and his words were burned into every leader's memory by now. Primitive species of Sol 3, you will submit to Imperial rule within 72 hours. Resistance is futile. Surrender is your only option for survival. This message will not be repeated. What followed the ultimatum was worse than the ultimatum itself. The data package showed images that made grown generals weep. Burned worlds, empty cities, species that had tried to resist and failed. The Dominion had conquered 847 different alien civilizations using this exact same approach. They would arrive with overwhelming force, deliver their ultimatum, and then either accept surrender or demonstrate why resistance was pointless. Adams watched the tactical display that showed their current situation. 300 alien warships hung in space just beyond Pluto's orbit. Each one was larger than anything humanity had ever built. Each one carried enough firepower to turn Earth's continents into glass. Intelligence estimates suggested the fleet carried over 1 million trained soldiers, along with weapons technology that was centuries ahead of human capabilities. Humanity's response capability looked pathetic by comparison. 23 outdated frigates, a handful of orbital defense platforms that might as well be shooting rubber bullets, some ground-based missile systems that probably couldn't even scratch the alien hulls. The math was simple and terrible. This wasn't going to be a war. This was going to be an execution. Defense Secretary Williams spread the latest reports across the table. His face looked like he'd aged a decade since morning. Every simulation gives us the same result. We can't win. We can't even hurt them. Our best-case scenario involves delaying them for maybe 6 hours while they destroy everything we've ever built. What about evacuation? Asked General Roberts. How many people can we get off-world before they arrive? Maybe 50,000, Williams replied. Out of 12 billion. And where would they go? The aliens control every habitable system we know about. We'd just be delaying the inevitable. President Adams stared at the tactical display. Those 300 red dots represented the end of human civilization. Everything they had built, everything they had dreamed of, everything they could become, all of it would end because some galactic empire had decided humanity needed to kneel. The worst part wasn't the military hopelessness. The worst part was the precedent. The data package showed that every single species had responded the same way. They either surrendered immediately or fought briefly before surrendering. The pattern was always identical. Ultimatum, capitulation, absorption into the empire. No exceptions, no variations, no success stories. Madam President, said Secretary of State Thompson, we need to make a decision. The joint session of Congress is waiting. The UN Security Council is waiting. The colonial governors are waiting. Everyone wants to know what we're going to do. Adams kept staring at those red dots. Somewhere behind them were real beings who had made a choice to threaten humanity. They had looked at human civilization and decided it needed to be conquered. They had calculated human military strength and concluded it was irrelevant. They had studied human responses and probably predicted exactly what would happen next. But something bothered her about that calculation. The aliens seemed to understand human technology and human military doctrine perfectly. Their ultimatum was precisely calibrated to human psychology, threatening enough to create panic, brief enough to prevent effective response, complete enough to demonstrate futility. They had done this 847 times before. They knew exactly how species responded to existential threats. which meant they probably expected humanity to surrender within the next few hours. "What if we asked for more time?" Adams said suddenly. "Ma'am?" Williams looked confused. "They gave us 72 hours. What if we used all of it? What if we told them we needed the full 3 days to prepare our response? To what end?" 3. Days won't change the military balance. Adams stood and walked to the window. Outside, people were still living normal lives. They deserved better than immediate surrender. They deserved a government that tried something, even if that something was impossible. "Maybe the military balance isn't what matters," she said. "Maybe what matters is that we respond as humans, not as another conquered species following the same script." The room fell quiet. Everyone understood what she was suggesting. Not surrender, not resistance, something else entirely. "Ma'am, with respect, what other option is there?" General Roberts asked. Adams turned back to face the room. The weight of 12 billion lives pressed down on her shoulders, but something else was growing alongside the weight. It wasn't hope exactly. It was more like curiosity. What would happen if humanity refused to follow the script? "I don't know, yet," she admitted. "But I want to find out. Draft a response. Tell Admiral Thorne that humanity needs the full 72 hours to prepare our answer, and then we figure out what that answer should be." "And if they refuse to wait?" Adams looked at the red dots one more time. "Then at least we'll have tried something different." The message went out 20 minutes later. Humanity would use the full 3 days. What they would do with those 3 days remained unclear, but for the first time since the ultimatum arrived, President Adams felt like they were finally doing something properly human. They were improvising. The supply requisitions made no sense to anyone looking at them. While the rest of the galaxy expected humanity to spend its final hours building weapons or digging bunkers, Earth's factories were working overtime to produce party streamers, folding tables, and something the humans called industrial-grade barbecue sauce. The Luna colonies had converted their mining operations to brew what appeared to be massive quantities of fermented beverages. Mars was coordinating what their communications described as the greatest potluck dinner in galactic history. Captain Voss of the Dominion Intelligence Division read through the intercepts with growing confusion. His job was to monitor enemy preparations and predict resistance strategies. After 3 decades analyzing alien military responses, he considered himself an expert on how species behaved when facing conquest. But humanity was breaking every pattern he understood. "They're requesting 10,000 portable sound systems," reported Lieutenant Beck, his communications officer. "Also, something called karaoke machines, and enough folding chairs to seat half their population." "Weapons?" Voss asked. "None that we can detect, although they did place a large order for fireworks." Voss stared at the tactical display showing Earth and its surrounding space. Normal pre-conquest activity involved frantic military mobilization, desperate diplomatic communications, or mass evacuation attempts. Sometimes species tried to hide their populations in bunkers or remote locations. Occasionally, they attempted to negotiate for partial surrender or delayed occupation. Humanity was making party favors. "Sir, we're also detecting massive food preparation operations," Beck continued. "Every major city on Earth appears to be cooking. The Mars colonies are growing what their agricultural reports describe as friendship vegetables, whatever those are. And their military response? That's the strangest part, sir. They're not hiding their forces or positioning them defensively. They're loading their ships with civilians, specifically, civilians carrying what appear to be musical instruments and folding tables." Admiral Thorne materialized on the bridge via hologram, his image flickering slightly due to the distance. His expression showed the kind of tired patience that came from conquering hundreds of worlds. "Report, Captain." "Sir, the human response is unprecedented," Voss began carefully. "They appear to be organizing some sort of large-scale social gathering." "Explain." "They're preparing food, music, and recreational activities on a massive scale. Our behavioral analysts suggest they may be experiencing a species-wide psychological break under the stress of imminent conquest." Thorn's expression didn't change. He had seen denial before. Some species convinced themselves that their conquerors weren't real, or that surrender was impossible, or that their gods would intervene. Mass delusion was a common response to overwhelming military superiority. Are they positioning any defensive systems? No, sir. If anything, they're dismantling some of their orbital platforms to make room for what they're calling docking facilities for our new friends. That got Thorn's attention. In 847 conquests, no species had ever referred to the Dominion as friends. Enemies, oppressors, invaders, destroyers, those terms were common. But friends? They're planning something, the Admiral decided. Some form of trap or deception. Increase monitoring of all human communications. Yes, sir. Although, sir, their communications aren't encrypted or hidden. They're broadcasting their preparations openly, including invitations. Invitations to what? To something they're calling a welcome to the neighborhood party. They've sent formal invitations to our entire fleet. For the first time in decades, Admiral Thorn felt genuinely confused. The invitation packet that arrived in his personal communications included detailed directions to food stations, entertainment areas, and something called friendship activities. There was also a polite request to bring your appetite and an open mind. Sir, Beck interrupted, we're receiving another transmission from the human leadership. President Adams appeared on screen, but not from the formal setting they expected. She was standing in what appeared to be a kitchen, wearing casual clothing and holding what looked like a wooden spoon. Behind her, dozens of humans were preparing food while music played softly. Admiral Thorn, she began, I hope this message finds you well. We wanted to update you on our preparations for your visit. We know you've probably conquered a lot of worlds, which must be exhausting work. We thought you and your people might enjoy a chance to relax and get to know your new neighbors properly. The transmission continued with what could only be described as a cheerful tourism advertisement. Adams described the various activities being prepared, music from dozens of human cultures, food representing every inhabited human world, games and sports from Earth's history, and something called cultural exchange workshops where everyone can share stories about their homeworlds. We've prepared accommodations for your entire fleet, Adams continued. We know military rations probably get boring, so we've arranged for our best cooks to prepare welcome meals. We've also set up recreational areas where your crew can unwind. Oh, and we've organized translation services so everyone can communicate properly. We're really looking forward to meeting you. The message ended with detailed coordinates for what the humans were calling friendship zones throughout their solar system. Admiral Thorn stared at the empty screen. In his long military career, he had received surrender documents, desperate pleas for mercy, threats of retaliation, and attempts at negotiation. But this was the first time a species about to be conquered had sent him a dinner invitation. Sir, how should we respond? Captain Voss asked. Thorn considered the situation. The humans clearly weren't preparing any military resistance. Their activities, while bizarre, posed no tactical threat. If this was some form of elaborate trap, it was unlike anything in the Dominion's databases. Maintain our position and monitoring, he decided. Let them continue their preparations. Whatever they're planning, it changes nothing. In 68 hours, they'll surrender like all the others. But as the Admiral reviewed the intelligence reports, something nagged at him. The humans seemed genuinely excited about their preparations. Their communications showed no fear, no desperation, no anger, just an inexplicable enthusiasm for meeting the beings who had come to conquer them. For the first time in 847 conquests, Admiral Thorn wondered if he truly understood what he was dealing with. The final hour arrived with humanity doing something that defied every military handbook in the galaxy. Instead of preparing for battle or drafting surrender documents, President Adams was putting on her favorite blue dress and practicing her welcome speech in the mirror. Around her, the White House staff was arranging flower bouquets and checking that the sound system was properly connected to every communication channel in human space. Admiral Thorn waited aboard his flagship, expecting the usual transmission. After 847 conquests, he knew exactly what came next. The human leader would appear on screen, probably crying, definitely defeated, reading a formal surrender that begged for mercy for their population. Then would come the standard occupation protocols, the establishment of imperial governance and another species added to the empire's collection. The communication channel activated, but instead of the expected surrender broadcast, President Adams appeared with something that looked remarkably like genuine joy on her face. Behind her was not a military command center or government building, but what appeared to be a massive celebration. Thousands of humans were visible, all of them, smiling, many holding signs that read "Welcome, friends," and "Glad you could make it" in multiple languages. Admiral Thorne, honored guests of the Galactic Dominion, Adams began, her voice carrying across every inhabited human world and directly to every ship in the alien fleet. Humanity's answer to your ultimatum is this: we invite you and your entire fleet to the biggest welcome party our galaxy has ever seen. The transmission shifted to show not just Earth, but every human world simultaneously. Luna's great domes had been converted into massive dining halls with tables stretching for kilometers. Mars showed enormous outdoor celebrations with stages, dance floors, and cooking areas that seemed to go on forever. The asteroid mining stations had transformed into floating party venues, complete with zero-gravity recreational activities. We know you've traveled a long way to visit us, Adams continued. We figured you must be tired, hungry, and probably curious about your new neighbors. So we prepared something special. Consider this humanity's formal response to your invitation to join the galactic community. What happened next broke every precedent in the history of space warfare. Human ships began emerging from behind planets, moons, and asteroids, not in attack formations, but in what could only be described as welcoming committees. They approached the Dominion fleet not with weapons extended, but with docking tubes deployed, and large signs displaying messages like "Food this way" and "Music and dancing, all species welcome." Admiral Thorne watched in growing disbelief as the first human ship docked with his flagship. Instead of soldiers or diplomats, what emerged was a small group of humans carrying covered dishes, musical instruments, and what appeared to be party hats. "Permission to come aboard, Admiral," said the lead human, a middle-aged man wearing a chef's apron that read "Galaxy's Best BBQ." "I'm Tom from Texas, and we brought dinner. Hope you folks are hungry." The Dominion security teams stood frozen, weapons ready but utterly confused about what exactly they were supposed to be defending against. Their training had covered every form of resistance from guerrilla warfare to suicide attacks, but nobody had prepared them for enthusiastic, middle-aged humans offering home-cooked meals. "Admiral," Tom continued, apparently unaware that he was addressing the most feared military commander in the galaxy, "we heard you might have some dietary restrictions, so we prepared a variety of options. Got some vegetarian dishes, protein-based, alternatives, even some foods that work for silicon-based life forms, though we're not sure if anyone in your crew falls into that category." Before Admiral Thorne could respond, more human ships were docking throughout his fleet. The organized military precision of the Dominion was colliding headfirst with humanity's chaotic but sincere hospitality. Reports flooded the communication channels from across the fleet. "Command, this is Dreadnought 7. Humans have boarded our vessel with something they call a mariachi band. Admiral, Cruiser Wing reports humans attempting to teach our crew traditional Earth dances. Sir, the humans have set up what they describe as a cultural exchange booth in our main hangar. They're asking our soldiers to share stories about their homeworlds." In the flagship's main corridor, Tom was still talking to Admiral Thorne as if they were old friends meeting at a neighborhood barbecue. "Now, Admiral, we weren't sure what kind of music your people enjoy, so we brought a variety. Got everything from classical symphonies to something called death metal, though I'm not sure why anyone would name music after death. Seems counterproductive for a party." The Admiral's tactical training kicked in. This had to be some form of psychological warfare or elaborate distraction. But distraction from what? His sensors showed no hidden weapons, no trap fleets, no sign of any military strategy whatsoever. The humans genuinely appeared to be throwing a party for their would-be conquerors. "What is the purpose of this?" Thorne finally managed to ask. Tom looked genuinely confused by the question. Purpose? Well, you folks came all this way to visit, so we figured we should be good hosts. Plus, we've never met anyone from outside our solar system before. We're curious about you. Where you come from, what your worlds are like, whether you enjoy Earth music, basic neighbor stuff. We came to conquer you. Well, sure, but that's just business, right? Doesn't mean we can't be friends while you're here. Besides, conquest is probably stressful work. You could probably use a vacation. Throughout the fleet, similar scenes were playing out. Dominion soldiers trained for war were finding themselves in the middle of informal cultural exchanges. Humans were sharing food, teaching games, asking questions about alien homeworlds, and treating their conquerors like honored guests at a family reunion. Private Reed, a Marine from Earth's Pacific Fleet, had somehow convinced an entire squad of Dominion shock troopers to participate in what he called line dancing lessons. Dr. Patel, a xenobiologist from the Luna colonies, was conducting impromptu friendship workshops where humans and aliens compared their different cultures. Lieutenant Kim from Seoul had discovered that the Dominion's AI systems could process human music and had started a karaoke session that was rapidly spreading through the fleet's communication network. Admiral Thorne realized he was facing something unprecedented. Not resistance, not surrender, but something entirely outside his experience. The humans were treating conquest like a social opportunity. Emperor Maxis had ruled the Galactic Dominion for 3 centuries without ever experiencing genuine confusion. His empire controlled 14,000 star systems, commanded fleets that could shatter planets, and had never failed to conquer a target species. But the reports flowing in from the Sol system made no sense according to any military doctrine he understood. His throne room, normally a place of formal military briefings and surrender ceremonies, now resembled a crisis management center. Holographic displays showed scenes that defied rational analysis. Dominion soldiers were playing what humans called football with their supposed prisoners. His flagship's dining halls had been converted into cultural exchange centers where humans and Dominion personnel shared meals and stories. Most disturbing of all, his troops were laughing. "Explain to me again," the Emperor said slowly, "how 300 dreadnoughts are being defeated by party planning." General Korax, his military advisor, looked like he had aged several years in the past week. "Majesty, they're not defeating us militarily, they're befriending us. That is not a recognized military strategy. No, Majesty, but it appears to be working." The latest reports were the most troubling. Admiral Thorne, the Dominion's most decorated commander, had formally requested permission to extend the occupation indefinitely for cultural research purposes. Half his fleet had submitted similar requests. The other half had asked for additional supplies to support what they described as ongoing friendship activities. "Show me the communication logs," Emperor Maxis demanded. The holographic display activated, showing the bridge of Admiral Thorne's flagship. But instead of the usual military efficiency, the scene looked like some sort of informal gathering. Humans and Dominion officers were seated together around tables covered with food, apparently engaged in friendly conversation. Admiral Thorne himself was wearing something that looked suspiciously like a party hat. "Admiral," the Emperor's voice cut through the chatter, "report your status immediately." Thorne looked up, and for a moment the old military discipline reasserted itself. Then he smiled, which was something the Emperor had never seen him do in 3 decades of service. "Majesty, the situation here is unprecedented. The humans have completely changed the nature of our operation. We're learning more about effective governance in 1 week than we learned in 3 centuries of conquest. You were ordered to accept their surrender or destroy their civilization." "Yes, sir, but they presented a third option we never considered, integration through friendship rather than force. Majesty, you should see what they've accomplished here. Our soldiers are happier than they've been in years. Morale is at record levels, and the humans are teaching us things about social organization that could revolutionize imperial governance." The Emperor stood, his ceremonial robes flowing around him. This conversation was approaching the limits of his patience. "Admiral, you will complete the conquest immediately." "Actually, sir, that might be problematic." "Explain." "Well, Majesty, the humans have done something quite clever. They've essentially made themselves indispensable to our operation. Our soldiers don't want to conquer them anymore. They want to work with them. And honestly, sir, after spending time here, I'm starting to understand why. The Emperor's anger was interrupted by his communications officer. Majesty, we're receiving priority transmissions from 17 other sectors. What about? Majesty, it appears that other conquered species have been monitoring the human situation. Several worlds are requesting permission to implement similar friendship protocols with their occupying forces. The implications hit Emperor Maxis like a physical blow. The human response wasn't just affecting one conquest, it was spreading throughout the empire. Species that had been under Dominion rule for decades were suddenly asking their governors to participate in cultural exchange programs. Military commanders across the galaxy were reporting that their troops were requesting recreational leave to better understand local customs. Show me the sector reports. The holographic displays filled with scenes that looked increasingly similar to the Sol system situation. On Rigel Prime, the local population had organized what they called a Getting to Know Our Neighbors Festival for their Dominion garrison. The mining colonies of Alpha Centauri had started teaching their overseers recreational activities. Even the prison worlds were reporting increased cooperation from inmates who wanted to share their cultural traditions with guards. Majesty, General Korak said carefully, we may have a larger problem. Our intelligence networks indicate that species throughout the galaxy are monitoring the human broadcasts. The concept of friendship-based integration is spreading faster than any rebellion we've ever faced. Emperor Maxis walked to the great window of his throne room, staring out at the capital world of his empire. Below, millions of beings from hundreds of different species went about their daily lives under imperial rule. For 3 centuries, that rule had been maintained through strength, fear, and the absolute certainty that resistance was futile. But what if resistance wasn't the issue? What if the problem was that no one had ever tried friendship? Sir, his communications officer interrupted again. We're receiving a personal message for you from the humans. Put it through. President Adams appeared on the main screen. But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her were Admiral Thorne and several other Dominion officers, all of whom looked remarkably relaxed for people engaged in a military conquest. Emperor Maxis, Adams began, we wanted to thank you for sending such wonderful ambassadors to our system. Admiral Thorne and his people have been absolutely delightful guests. We've learned so much about your empire and the challenges of governing such a vast territory. We have a proposal for you, Thorne added, and the Emperor noticed that his admiral was actually smiling. What if instead of conquest we tried cooperation? The humans have some remarkable ideas about social organization and conflict resolution. I think you'd find them fascinating. Majesty, Adams continued, we'd like to invite you to visit Sol System personally. We're planning a galaxy-wide cultural festival, and we think you'd enjoy meeting representatives from all your member species in a more relaxed setting. We've heard you've been ruling for 3 centuries. You've earned a vacation. Emperor Maxis stared at the transmission. In 3 centuries of rule, no one had ever suggested he take a vacation. No one had ever called his conquered territories member species, and no one had ever invited him to a party. As he considered the unprecedented situation, reports continued flowing in from across the empire. The human approach was spreading like wildfire, transforming military occupations into cultural exchanges and turning conquered worlds into collaborative communities. For the first time in his long reign, Emperor Maxis faced a problem that couldn't be solved with superior firepower. The humans had weaponized friendship, and it was more effective than any military strategy he had ever encountered. 1 year later, the being formerly known as Emperor Maxis was having the strangest morning of his very long life. Instead of receiving military reports about conquered worlds and subjugated populations, he was reviewing planning documents for the 2nd Annual Galactic Community Cultural Festival. His title had changed too. He now went by Community Coordinator Max, a name suggested by a group of human children who thought Emperor sounded too stuffy for someone organizing galaxy-wide friendship activities. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first few months after the Sol system incident had been chaotic, with military commanders across the Empire reporting that their troops were more interested in learning local customs than maintaining order. Several hardline generals had attempted counter-revolutions, but found it remarkably difficult to recruit soldiers for rebellions when those same soldiers were busy teaching alien children how to play games from their home worlds. Admiral Thorne, now Director of Galactic Recreational Services, knocked on the door of what used to be the Imperial Throne Room and was now the Community Coordination Center. The space had been completely redesigned by human volunteers and looked more like a comfortable living room than a seat of galactic power. "Morning, Max," Thorne said, carrying what appeared to be coffee and some sort of pastry. "The Luna colony sent over some fresh-baked goods for the planning meeting. Apparently they've developed a recipe that works for 17 different alien digestive systems." Max accepted the coffee gratefully. This was another human innovation that had spread throughout the galaxy, the concept of casual morning meetings over shared food. It was remarkably more pleasant than the formal military briefings that had dominated his previous 3 centuries of rule. "What's the status on the festival preparations?" Max asked. "Better than expected. We've got participation confirmations from 837 different species. The humans have organized transportation for everyone, plus they've arranged for simultaneous translation services so all the different languages can interact properly." Through the large windows that had replaced the throne room's intimidating architecture, Max could see the transformation of the capital world. What had once been a sterile military installation was now a bustling community center where beings from hundreds of different worlds lived, worked, and played together. Children of dozens of species attended integrated schools where they learned about each other's cultures. Adults participated in interspecies sports leagues, cooking clubs, and hobby groups that would have been impossible under the old imperial system. "Any problems with the former military zones?" Max asked. "Actually, that's turned into one of our biggest success stories," Thorne replied. "The humans had this idea about converting old military bases into recreational centers. Turns out that beings who spent their lives as soldiers really enjoy having constructive activities to focus on. We've got former shock troopers teaching art classes and ex-commandos running youth sports programs." The irony wasn't lost on Max. The military might that had conquered hundreds of worlds was now being used to organize community events and protect cultural festivals. Former invasion fleets had been converted into cruise ships that helped beings from different worlds visit each other. The Empire's communication networks, once used to coordinate conquests, now carried an endless stream of cultural exchange programs, interspecies friendship requests, and collaborative project proposals. "Sir," interrupted Communications Director Voss, formerly Captain Voss of Intelligence Services, "we've got the daily happiness reports from the member communities." This was another human innovation that had surprised everyone. Instead of monitoring worlds for signs of rebellion or resistance, the new galactic community tracked how satisfied and content their populations were. The results had been remarkable. Happiness levels across the galaxy had increased by measures that statisticians were still trying to understand. The Rigel colonies report record levels of satisfaction with their new cooperative mining programs. Voss continued. The Centauri systems have started 3 new interspecies cultural exchange programs, and the former prison worlds are requesting additional resources for their expanded educational and recreational programs. Max reviewed the reports with something that still felt strange after a lifetime of imperial rule. Genuine satisfaction that didn't come from conquest. The beings under his authority were happier, more productive, and more creative than they had ever been under military control. Wars had become practically extinct because it was hard to fight people you considered friends. "There is one concern," Thorne mentioned carefully. "We're getting reports of some isolated groups trying to restore the old military approach. A few former generals have established independent territories where they're attempting to revive traditional conquest strategies." "How serious is the threat?" "Honestly, not very. They're having trouble recruiting anyone. Most of our former military personnel prefer their current jobs. It's hard to convince someone to give up running community centers and recreational programs to go back to conquering worlds. Plus, the species they're trying to conquer keep inviting them to dinner and asking if they want to learn local games." Max laughed. something he had learned to do from human teachers. The idea that conquest had become literally impossible because potential victims were too friendly was absurd, but it was also wonderfully effective. President Adams appeared on the communication screen for their regular coordination meeting. She was calling from Earth, where she was helping organize the festival's main events. "Max, Tom," she greeted them. "How are the preparations going on your end?" "Ahead of schedule," Max replied. "Though I have to admit, I never imagined I'd spend my mornings reviewing entertainment schedules and food service logistics. Beats reviewing military conquest reports, doesn't it?" Max considered that. For 3 centuries, his days had been filled with military briefings, conquest reports, and the administrative details of controlling unwilling populations through force. Now his schedule included things like review applications for new friendship, exchange programs, and approve funding for interspecies art projects. "President Adams," he said, "I wanted to thank you for what humanity has done for the galaxy. We thought we were bringing order through strength, but you showed us something better." "Max, you don't need to thank us. We just did what felt natural. Treated strangers like friends we hadn't met yet. Turns out the rest of the galaxy was ready for the same approach." As the meeting continued, Max reflected on the transformation. The Galactic Dominion no longer existed, replaced by something unprecedented. A voluntary community of worlds united by friendship rather than fear. Species that had been enemies for millennia were now collaborating on projects that benefited everyone. The galaxy's first interspecies comedy clubs were opening next month. Mixed species families were becoming common. Wars had been replaced by friendly competitions and cultural exchanges. Humanity's absurd response to conquest, throwing a party for their would-be conquerors, had done more than end a war. It had ended the concept of war itself, replacing it with something far more powerful. A galaxy-wide family reunion that showed no signs of ending. Outside his window, beings from 800 different worlds were preparing for a celebration that would have been impossible under Imperial rule. Children who had never known war played games that combined traditions from dozens of cultures. Adults who had once been enemies shared meals and stories about their home worlds. Max smiled as he watched them, grateful that humanity had been too stubborn to follow the script.